So I think that Ted asked me to talk with you because he knows that I went to the Kingdom of Bhutan years ago, which is this storied place where people meditate and I thought practiced yoga, which it turned out they didn't. And then I came home and I instantly wanted to find a monk to study with, which in LA is not as simple as it would be in a place like Bhutan. And I did do that. So I'm intrigued by everything that you've written here, and most importantly to begin with is that you went to India at a time before people like me just trounced over there. Can you talk about how you got into meditation even before you went to India? Is that right?
Yeah. So I started meditating when I was in college because I was like anxious, undergrad angst. And I started with TM, which is a wonderful practice. And then when I was in graduate school, I was just by accident, I remember it was a grim Boston Christmas holiday, and I was writing a paper on suicide. And it wasn't a pretty picture. And this woman shows up, knocks on my door in my apartment, beautiful woman, and says, I just came back from Nepal, and I have a letter for you from a friend that she'd met, and I have also, I want to go up and meet someone I just heard about who just came from India, and I need a ride. And I said, I'll give you that ride. And so we enter this room in a very large kind of estate in New Hampshire, and there's one light on. We go up there, and there's a guy with a long white beard, all in white, and the walls are covered with these pictures, gaudy pictures of Indian saints and gods, and it was really bizarre. The most bizarre thing was, it was this guy who was sitting there did not say a word. His eyes were closed, and she sat down and didn't say a word. And I had never been with two people who didn't say a word. So I was, wondering what the heck is going on. Then he opens his eyes, and his name turns out to be Ram Dass. So Ram Dass had just come back from India. I knew about him because I was enrolled in Harvard at the department that he'd been fired from 5 years before, along with Tim Leary, for his excursions with psychedelics. So I was really fascinated by Ram Dass, and in fact, I was actually a member of the graduate student colloquium committee, and I said to him, hey, why didn't you come back to Harvard and give a lecture? And he thought that was a wonderful idea. People at Harvard didn't think it was so great, but he came, and he was fabulous. And I was really intrigued. But the next day, this is the atmosphere, the next day my professor in clinical psychology has lunch with me, and he leans across the table and he says, very confident, in this like clinical tone, tell me, is he psychotic? And I look back at this guy who would do anything to his grandmother to get a tenured position at Harvard. I think, who's psychotic here? So anyway, I ended up going to India and studying with his teacher, who was named Neem Karoli Baba. And Neem Karoli Baba had qualities I'd never seen before in a human being. He was absolutely present. He was available to everyone. You felt unconditional love. The most amazing thing was that when you were with him, you felt unconditional love yourself for other people. It was contagious. And I met a handful of people like that in India. So I go back to Harvard and I say, hey, there's something going on. There's something about the human potential that we don't know about. Because in clinical psychology, when you meet someone, it's like, what's wrong with this person? And not what could be right with this person. And they said, we don't care, basically. They thought it was very beside the point. So then there was huge resistance. But while I was in India, I learned, how to meditate. I went on long retreats, and I found monks. They're easy to find in India. Yeah.
But so it must have been strange to go back and forth from that culture in India to the vaunted world of Harvard.
It was very bizarre, because when I went back to Cambridge, I felt that was the foreign country. Like, it was really weird compared to India, where everybody had a spiritual practice. When you met someone in India, the first question they asked you was, what was your spiritual tradition? What's your practice? And in Cambridge, that was not only a bizarre question, it was probably diagnosable.
Right.
You know, yeah.
What did your family think?
Well, I had an unusual family. They actually approved. My mom was a professor, my dad was a professor. He'd studied Sanskrit. We had friends who were. So luckily I had some support from that front, but at Harvard it was like, we don't know. And then the guy who wrote this book with me, Richard Davidson, Richie was the one person at Harvard who said, oh, that sounds interesting. And he wanted to do his dissertation, as I did, on meditation, because it seemed like, well, everyone I met who was like really amazing had done a lot of meditation. It seemed like there's a there. And we were told in no uncertain terms that doing that was a career-ending move.
Well, in fact, you did publish a paper as a very young scholar that I just found on the internet before I came.
I'm very impressed you found that. I don't think that journal exists anymore.
I was excited that I didn't have to pay through, JSTOR or
oh, right.
things
Right.
for it. But not that I wouldn't have. But it was so interesting that you published that paper, and here I have the name. You remember the name of it. That you published that paper as such a young man, and that you weren't vilified at Harvard, or were you? I mean, was
well,
it?
I was a little shunned, I would say, but Richie and I went ahead and did it. And in those days, there were only 3 published papers in the scholarly literature that we could cite. Today, when we did this book, there are 6,000 peer-review articles on meditation.
Wow.
And a lot of them are really not very good. So we identified 60, that's 1%, that are like ironclad, and those are what we talk about. And actually the news is pretty good for meditators.
I want to talk about that, but I want to talk first about your personal experience
Sure.
with it, because you've been meditating now for a long time, and I'd imagine there are
Well, I don't know. How many people here actually meditate? Oh my
Yeah,
goodness.
well,
It's like everyone in LA who meditates. How many people have done it for more than a year?
wow.
Oh my goodness. Okay. Good.
That's why they're here to see you.
Yeah, well, the news is good. I just want to tell you that. Yeah.
But that's you've been doing this for a long time
Right.
now, and so there's no way to know what would have happened had you not. But
Right.
what?
I think I would be more uptight, more rigid, and less nice.
And you are very nice.
Oh, thank you
But
very
when
much.
you were in college, you were smart enough to write. You were saying you started in college when some people might have done drugs and partied to deal with the anxiety. You somehow knew.
Well, I tried a little of everything, actually. Yeah.
Good. We
Yeah.
just worried about you, especially then, if you'd gone to school.
Yeah, but this actually seemed to work, and that's why I got very interested in it. So back in the day, I went to Berkeley for like a year and a half during the Summer of Love, and when there were tons of people coming from Asia to be teachers. So let me fast forward. I'm back in Cambridge, and this Swami hears that 2 graduate students at Harvard are interested in meditation. He contacts us and he says, biofeedback was very big then. That meant, you get your heart rate signal fed back to you, and you could control it. He said, I could control my autonomic nervous system without any feedback. And he said, well, we want to see you. So we got another friend, a guy named John Kabat-Zinn, who then he had just graduated from MIT. He was teaching yoga in the basement of a church in Harvard Square. He had not started his famous mindfulness-based stress reduction. That came a little later. But Johnny was interested, so we commandeered a lab at Harvard Medical School. The Swami comes, and we ask him, could you lower your heart rate? And he raised his heart rate. And could you raise your heart rate? And he lowered his heart rate. And then he did a special trick he called dog samadhi, where he went into what we would call atrial fibrillation, which is not a good skill to have. Yeah. So we thought, well, we won't write anything about the Swami, but afterwards, every time he gave a talk, he made sure that he mentioned that scientists at Harvard have studied my brain. So that was the beginning of our understanding how meditation could be hyped, which is a very big problem. So when we saw this spread, 99% of the articles have some flaw, but we see that they're mentioned or used as the basis for like selling mindfulness to a corporation. And so we really tried to be very rigorous. Do people know mindfulness-based stress reduction? That's John Kabat-Zinn's view. So this was maybe the first big application of mindfulness. He designed it when he was working at the University of Massachusetts Medical Center, and it was meant to help patients with chronic problems, pain that won't go away and can't be treated, things like that, to live a better quality of life with their disease. It's not going to cure it, but it's going to help you manage it. And it does, because it changes your relationship to the pain or to the whatever. So Richie, my co-author, who's also a good friend of Johnny, did a study that compared mindfulness-based stress reduction to something they invented called the Health Enhancement Program, which was diet, nutrition, exercise, and the instructors were just as positive about that as the ones from MBSR, and when they compared the data, it was the same. So if you ask yourself, how has this helped me, it turns out you're not the best judge, because other things will help you just as much if you have positive expectation and you put time into it. So that was one way we set aside a lot of the studies. We look for biological markers because, brain changes. Those things really make a difference.
You write. Actually, let's talk first a little bit more about Richie, because we've got to give him some more props. And you went on to become this best-selling author. He went on to become a famous neuroscientist.
So here's what happened. So Richie Davidson became a famous neuroscientist because he was clever enough to make his research at Harvard not only about meditation, but about using EEG to track attention. That was a big new idea. Nobody noticed the meditation part. I was stupid enough to do my whole dissertation on meditation. So that's why I became a journalist. It was career ending, actually. I just went into a different career.
I think it worked out okay.
It worked out
for you.
okay, yeah. Lucky break. Yeah.
But he's been at Wisconsin for years, which is an epicenter of very interesting work. The Mind Life Institute is different, but
so Richie has a lab there with about 100 people, Buddhist scholars, physicists, quantum physicists, data analysts, and skeptics, which is very important. People who think this, isn't really worth looking at. And he has brought over what you'd have to call Olympic-level meditators. These are Tibetan yogis, all of whom have done a 3-year retreat. Imagine that. I mean, how many people have done a 3-day retreat?
3 days, right.
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
So 3 years is quite a commitment. But these people live in a culture which values what they're doing. It's a culture that supports them, that will bring them food, that will, whatever they need. And we see 3 different levels. There's the hardcore meditation in situ, in its original context. That's the culture that thinks this is a good idea, in a monastery or an ashram where you're supportive with other people who are doing. This is like the hardcore industrial strength meditation. Very few people will do that, but they go very deep. Then there's the practices as they're brought to America. I have a good friend here, Billy, who has been a Goenka meditator. So Goenka was one of the first teachers to take what's known as Vipassana in India and in southern Asia, Southeastern Asia, and brought it to America in a form which is very palatable, very approachable. It's easy to do, and you can even do a 10-day course and have really a good benefit from it. But you may not go as deep as people who do it for 3 years straight. Probably not. And then there's the next remove, which is really big, which is take it totally out of the spiritual context. Just take the mechanics. And there are very powerful mechanics in any meditation. And bring them to a business, bring them to a school, but leave behind the religion. Leave behind all of the other things that go with it. So if you look at that last level goes to scale. Hundreds of thousands, maybe millions of people can do that. So you may not go as deep, but it reaches a lot more people.
Is that why it's become so popular now in the last years, do you think? Because the religion was extracted from it?
If you did kind of a graph of how many studies have been done in meditation, starting in the 70s when they're like zip when we were doing it. And now there are more than 1,000 a year. It goes like this. And the inflection point is about 5 years ago. I don't know what happened 5 years ago. Something happened. It became something that was okay to do research on. They do it at UCLA. They do it, a lot of it here. It became something you could talk about. I remember when I wrote Emotional Intelligence and started talking to business people about it, I was told, you can't use the word emotion in business. Like, people want to, and now, and mindfulness is like everywhere. People think mindfulness is meditation, like it's one kind of meditation.
Right.
But, you know, it's gone to scale. It's gone viral.
Is meditation different than prayer? How is meditation
Sure.
different than prayer?
So there are probably hundreds of kinds of meditation, and most meditation is not what you call discursive thought. So most prayer is discursive thought.
Okay.
Dear Lord, I'm praying for this, that. In other words, you use words. In meditation, you get behind the words, usually. However, some people pray silently. And so I would say they converge. But that's the place where they converge.
It's interesting, though, because I think I practiced yoga for 25 years, and
really?
I've watched yoga
Oh.
go from being
That was pretty
sort of
esoteric back
oddball.
then, back
yeah,
in the day.
and in North Carolina is where I started.
Oh,
of
North
all
Carolina,
places.
you were the only one, I think.
And the person teaching.
Yeah, right.
But watching it evolve or devolve over the last 25 years into this type A athletic sport, it's been very interesting.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm wondering if that's what's happening now in your estimation.
Well, there's
with
something very
meditation.
similar. For example, when I was in India, I lived there 2 years. I met real yogis, like Himalayan yogis, who would not recognize what goes on in the malls here as yoga. That's like, what the heck are they doing? You
Right.
know? First of all, there's a former colleague of mine, a guy named Bill Broad, who's still at the New York Times, who did a history. He wrote a book on the science about yoga, and he traced the routines that are now commonplace in America to the British. He says that they were modeled not on what yogis did, but an amalgam of some yoga postures with the calisthenics the British had brought. So the routines that we know as, oh, that's a yoga routine, actually are a modern invention. The yogis, for example, I hung out with some yogis, they don't do any postures that are standing. They don't stand on their head. That's like a new idea, a new thing.
It's all a
Yeah,
twist.
and the hot yoga or the yoga to get a better butt or whatever, what is that about? Because classically, yoga was done so that you could sit still in meditation for long periods.
Right, they were inextricably
Yeah, they were
linked.
one-on-one, yeah.
Matthew Ricard has appeared in
Oh,
this series
Matthew.
on this very stage.
Oh, I love Matthew.
And he, you write about him in the book and how
Sure.
he takes you to, is it Mingyur Rinpoche?
Yeah.
Is he the person? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah.
Because I thought that was an embodiment of the science.
So Matthew's a really interesting guy. I don't know if any of you saw him when he was here. He's wonderful. He was a PhD in microbiology at the Pasteur Institute. It's like the French MIT or Caltech. And he decided to give it all up and went to Asia and became a monk and lived in a hermitage for decades. He was the right-hand guy to a very highly regarded meditation master named Khyentse Rinpoche. And Matthew has done, thousands and thousands of hours over his lifetime of meditation. By the way, if you do 3 years, you get credit for 10,000 hours. The person that Richie studied that had the most had 62,000. I don't know where Matthew falls, but he's pretty high there. So Richie originally tried to experiment on yogis in the hills around where the Dalai Lama lives in Dharamsala. Dalai Lama encouraged him. He gave him a letter to give to yogis, which said effectively, I know this guy looks weird and this stuff is really strange, his equipment you've never seen, but trust me, you should go along. And so he went to yogi after yogi, and they all said, no way am I going to do that. And they gave a very intelligent reason. They said, I don't know what your machines measure. And they had schlepped like hundreds of pounds of machinery to the hills. And if I don't happen to look good, and according to what your machines measure, it might discourage people. So I'm not going to do it. That was the reason. However, Matthew said, I know some yogis that'll do it because I'll do it. And they'll trust me because I know them really well. So Matthew was subject number one, but he came to the lab. I happened to see Matthew the first time he went in an fMRI, a brain scanner. First of all, he was asked to do 3 different kinds of meditation. I don't know about you all, but when I sit to meditate, it takes me a little while for my mind to settle, like maybe a long time, because it wanders. Matthew, they asked him, we'd like you to do concentration for 90 seconds, and then when you hear a buzzer, stop for 30 seconds, and do it again for 4 times, with 3 different kinds of meditation. He did it just like that. I mean, the mental agility of this level, the meditator, is phenomenal. And because they had some problems with it, he was in the scanner for about 3 hours. Some people won't go in an MRI because they're phobic, and it's clangy and noisy. And he came out, he was smiling, he said, that was like a little mini retreat. That's Matthew. So Matthew got 21 high-level yogis to come to the lab. And the findings there were quite phenomenal, never seen before by science. Are you going to ask me what they were?
Yes, they all will.
Oh, okay. Well, funny you should ask. So, yeah. So one of them is really interesting. When we get a really good creative insight, like we solved this problem we've been grappling with, yes, your brain shows what's called a gamma wave. It's the highest energy wave, and it lasts for about a half second. When you imagine biting into a really juicy peach, and your brain puts together the taste and the smell and the sound, and when you get that same gamma wave, that's about the only time it shows up. The yogis have gamma all the time. So they're in a totally different state. The name of the book is Altered Traits. That's an altered trait. It's in the brain. It's a different kind of brain function. And it seems to go along with what we would call personality changes, like Neem Karoli Baba. These people are very nourishing. You've had nourishing encounters with people where you feel better, and you've had toxic encounters where you feel real bummed out. These people are never toxic. You always feel good with them and after you're with them. So there's just a range of findings like that. And also, we shouldn't skip to the top because the changes start right from the beginning.
And that's, you talk in the book about programs with children. The whole idea of exercising your body,
right,
eating well from the beginning.
Sure.
And
well,
meditation from early.
So I was talking to a woman in Cape Cod who does meditation with kids there. And she said that they also teach them about neuroscience. But here's neuroscience for a 5-year-old. You have to use your imagination. The imagination is that there's snow. Can you imagine that? Snow? You're in LA. So it's a snowy day in Cape Cod, and this little boy, 5-year-old boy, wants to go out and play in the snow. His mom says to him, well, fine, but you have to put your snowsuit on. And he has a tantrum. There's no way he's going to put it on. He's pounding on the floor and crying, and no. Then all of a sudden he stops, and he gets up, he goes into his room for a minute or two, and comes back, calmly puts on his snowsuit, and goes out. And his mom says, what just happened? Before he goes out. And he says, well, my guard dog got really mad, and so I had my wise owl talk to it. The guard dog is the amygdala. It's the part of the brain that triggers us when you get angry or scared. And the wise owl is the prefrontal cortex, which can calm the amygdala. So he had learned this basic science, and it turns out that from the beginning, the inhibitory circuitry in the prefrontal area gets stronger and stronger. This is one of the first things that happens. So I saw a classroom in Spanish Harlem, second grade classroom, and every day they do what they call breathing buddies. You get your favorite stuffed animal, and you find a place to lie down on the rug, and you put it on your tummy, and you watch it rise on the in-breath, fall on the out-breath, rise. It's mindfulness for 7-year-olds. And they love it. And the teacher says, that's why this classroom, which, by the way, the kids live in, a housing project, totally traumatic. It's a classroom where a girl came in one day really upset, and the teacher says, what's wrong? She said, I just saw someone who was shot. And she says to the class, how many of you know someone who's been shot? Every hand went up. So it's a really traumatic childhood. And the kids are very focused and very calm. And it's because of this. And what they're doing is enhancing something that in cognitive science is called cognitive control. It's the ability to keep your mind on one thing and ignore distractions. And this ability, by the way, is needed more than ever today.
Yes.
Because I just heard about a guy in Silicon Valley who was on the team that developed the first iPhone. He said, we're all in our 20s, and we made it as seductive as could be. You go out anywhere, everyone's looking at their phone. He says, now I have kids, and I'm really sorry.
Wow.
Because today's generation of children have never known a day you couldn't have a device with a screen that you could look at and ignore the people around you. So distractions, kids are growing up with distractions everywhere, which I think means this is an argument for training this attentional skill, cognitive control. It turns out if you measure cognitive control in kids 4 to 8 and then track them down in their 30s, this was done in New Zealand. You could never do this in LA. You never find them in their 30s. In New Zealand, nobody moves. So they found that cognitive control in childhood was the best predictor of your health and financial success in your 30s, better than IQ,
Wow.
and better than the wealth of the family you grew up in. It levels the playing field. So, I feel like not only does every kid need it, but it might speak to some of the inequities in income and all of that by giving kids an inner tool that will help them achieve their long-term goals, keep their eye on what matters, all of that. So I'm a big advocate of it.
In Bhutan, they started teaching the kids meditation each day in school, which they hadn't before because they realized the impact of television on the culture. Kids were starting to beat each other up because they were seeing wrestling on the air.
Right?
So but now my question to you, and I think many people here may have even entered the world of meditation, because how do we counter this? I was up for a job earlier this year where the man said to me, oh, so-and-so left here because he didn't like having email all the time. He didn't like email on his phone. Can you imagine somebody who didn't want email on their phone?
Primitive. Yes,
and I thought, oh boy, what a job. So how do we, in this world that's competing for so much attention, and, how do we?
This is one of the things you find from the beginning in meditation. It trains attention. I mean, the basic move, for example, mindfulness of the breath, what these kids are doing, you put your attention there and the mind wanders. You know about that famous Harvard study where they gave people an app in their phone that rang them at random times a day, and it asked 3 questions. What are you doing? What are you thinking about? And how do you feel? And it turned out that people's mind wander on average around 50% of the time. 90%, this is going to hurt in LA, but 90% when you're commuting in your car, 90% when you're sitting in front of a video monitor, and I'm sorry to say 90% when you're at work. It's a big problem. Disengagement, we call it in HR. It wanders only 10% during romantic moments. But who answers an app at a moment like that? I think that's fallacious. Anyway, so if your mind wanders half the time anyway, people check their email on average more than 70 times a day.
Right.
They look at their Facebook more than 20 times a day. This is an average. So we are in a time where we're afflicted by distraction. It's so, as I said, seductive. So meditation is training you to keep your mind on that one thing, and when it wanders, notice it wandered, and bring it back. That's like a fundamental move in an inner gym, a mental gym. It's mental fitness. It's like when you're in a gym and you lift a weight. Every time you do a rep, you make that muscle that much stronger. Every time you bring your mind back, you're strengthening the circuitry of the brain for focusing. So I think this is a survival skill today. It turns out that from the beginning, meditators start developing a better concentration. You see better concentration, you see college students, this is interesting, UCSB, they took one group of kids taught them mindfulness, or students I should say, and another group did something else. The ones who did the mindfulness had better what's called working memory. That's what you're hearing right now goes into your long-term memory and you can pull it up later. They got a 16% higher score in their GRE, the graduate school entrance exam. So kids learn better. And not only that, but remember I said I did it because I was anxious in college. The amygdala gets calmer and you recover more quickly. So it makes you clear and focused and calm right from the beginning, which is why I think we should teach it to every kid. Why not?
It's like exercise. We have to prioritize it in our lives.
Exactly.
And if we would rather be
attached. And, there are two reasons people give for not starting to meditate. One is I don't have the time.
Right.
Which is bullshit. I mean, think of what, come on. Of course you have the time. What you mean is I don't value it that much.
Right.
And the second is my mind is crazy. It wanders all the time. And that actually is a good sign because it means you're paying attention inside. It has been wandering all your life. You just didn't notice. You just wandered along with it.
So it's like people
So that's actually not a bad thing that you notice. Yeah.
People who don't do yoga because they're stiff. I can't do yoga because I'm stiff.
Right.
Can we have to talk about the Dalai Lama. And it's interesting because he's been convening scientific-based conferences for quite some time now. Is it 20 years at this point? I mean, for a while.
Yeah, probably more. It started under an organization. I'm actually on the board of the Mind and Life Institute,
Right.
which he co-founded. And the original idea was to, he's a science buff. It started as tutorials for him. It later became him advising scientists. So one of the bits of advice he gave was to Richie Davidson. He said to him during one of these meetings, which was on the topic destructive emotions, when emotions become destructive. He said, my tradition has many methods for handling destructive emotions. Take them outside the religious tradition, bring them to the lab, test them rigorously, and if they benefit people, spread them very widely, that actually gave birth to what's called contemplative neuroscience. As I said, it's done at UCLA. One of the findings at UCLA, which I am very encouraged by, is that meditation seems to slow the aging of the brain. Well, that's cool.
Yeah.
Another interesting finding, this is for people who are like in the long-term category. You do it, you have a day job, you meditate every day, and maybe you go to retreat once a year or something like that. If you do 1 day of meditation, the genes that create inflammation in the body downregulate, they go quiet. This is called epigenetics. Epigenetics says it's not the genes you inherited that matter, it's whether they're active or not. And inflammation is at cause in, you name it, diabetes, arthritis, heart disease. So that sounds good. We don't know if it's clinically significant. It may well be. I'm hoping so. And by the way, geneticists, when they heard about this study, Richie did the study, they said, oh, that's not going to work. That's impossible. But that's, it's one thing after another that seemed impossible that now is proving out.
But the Dalai Lama encouraged and understood that they're both entwined.
He's been totally encouraged this program and also encouraged Richie to start a kind of young scientist program when, it's still a little rare to study meditation because, you might be the only person at your university doing it. So he networked people. He put together a summer institute for graduate students and postdocs to encourage them and to stay in touch and encourage each other. And I think that's fed that 6,000 studies that we found.
What's some of the hype? What's the most ridiculous claim you've heard about meditation?
Oh.
Or what are some of?
I don't really track hype.
Because you got rid of
Yeah,
them.
I'm sorry.
So you were able to weed out
Yeah,
the 60
we're just
studies
looking for what's actually sound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So you're looking at the science as
Yeah.
opposed to...
Well, I just did an article for the Harvard Business Review about mindfulness at work and people who do mindfulness and who, They said, I got a promotion, I was this, that, and the other because I do mindfulness. It turned out it wasn't really because they did mindfulness. They actually improved in other competencies that make you good at those things, but they attributed it to mindfulness. So there's a general feeling that this is like the flavor du jour. It's not faddish in the sense that there is a there, but people, I think, over-attribute benefits to it.
Kind of like kale. Not that there's anything wrong with kale.
Well, I would like to defend kale, actually.
I love kale.
Yeah,
I'm
kale
happy
is
that
awesome.
kale is hot.
Yeah,
Right.
like kale.
But like eating kale or drinking water or being nice to people or all the other good things,
Yes.
exercising, it all seems so obvious. So why is it, do you think, that there are still naysayers? There are people who, diss integrative medicine, and I mean, they just don't understand the whole idea that this principle, is it because it's rooted in Buddhism and people, in some people's mind, and that's weird?
Well, I suppose there are a lot of reasons you could discount it. But I mean, one reason we did this book is that these are really bulletproof studies in here. And they show benefits from the beginning. They get better the longer. It's a dose-response relationship. The more you do it, the stronger the benefits. So that the attention that I said shows up in beginners shows up in many more ways in long-term practitioners. The recovery from stress gets quicker. Your amygdala reacts less. You're triggered less often. Another wonderful benefit has to do with compassion meditation, meditating on people you love, people you know but don't necessarily even like, and people everywhere, and wishing them well, wishing them that they be safe or healthy or whatever. It turns out that, which is a kind of just purely cognitive maneuver, actually has a brain effect, a neural effect. And people, the part of the brain that gets stronger is interesting. It's the circuitry that we share with all mammals. It's the parental caretaking circuitry. It's a parent's love for a child. And that circuitry extends, and it becomes compassion generally. So people become more likely to be generous with people who need it, to help someone out in need. So it does all three levels. It changes the brain and makes you more likely even to just notice people who need help.
And as you say, it happens, it's like when you quit smoking, apparently you start repairing right away. Is it the same sort of thing? Once you start meditating, you get the benefits right away, but obviously the longer you do it, the more intense.
and you may not notice at first, but the longer you do it. Like, I don't notice this, but my wife, who I've been married to for decades now, says I become nicer. Is that because I'm older or because I meditate? I don't know. I need a clone who doesn't meditate, then we'll know for sure. But I think it's the meditation.
I think we'll get ready to open it up for questions in a moment, but I want to ask you, we talked a little bit about this whole myth of multitasking.
Oh, yeah.
You write about that in this book.
So that's interesting. So cognitive scientists have found that multitasking actually is a myth because the brain doesn't do things in parallel. It does them in serial, one after the other. The brain switches very rapidly. So when you're doing that one thing that's so important and you're focused on it and your concentration is very high, and then you think, oh, I better check my email. And then there's your texts and there's your Facebook and da-da-da-da-da. And then you go back to that one thing. Your concentration that was here is now down here. Unless you did just 10 minutes of mindfulness. It nullifies that. Your concentration stays high. So multitasking itself is a myth, but the harm it does to your concentration, no myth at all, but this training and attention actually reverses that effect, which I think is very good news, and that's one of the effects that you see in beginners.
I think it's ironic, though, that there are these meditation applications on a phone, which is sort of the prime...
Yeah. Tell me about it.
Yeah.
Really, yes.
How does that... Have you used them?
Well, I mean, the way I see it is that, your phone is the source of some of the worst distractions that we have. And to have something that counters that on the phone is very clever, actually, if you think about it that way. Like, if you can do something with the phone, get so you can ignore the phone. How's that?
That's a good goal.
Total rationalization, but
You're a better
take
man
it.
than I am. Do you find you have a problem even with your knowledge and your practice that the phone is a problem for you? Be honest.
Yes. How's that?
Well, I mean, does it?
But it's not such a big problem. I have a Twitter feed. I have a Facebook thing. I have LinkedIn. I have all this stuff, but I actually don't do any of that, and I don't look at any of that. It's just between us, okay? Really. So, I approve it and so on. But I actually try to stay away from that. I do, and we're both reformed journalists. We both were at the New York Times at one point. And there is no more journalism as we knew it. And I have to confess that I read the news on my phone. I used to like to read it in the paper, but it's much more convenient and quicker on the phone.
Interesting.
Yeah. So, and when I find myself, I forgot to say the third thing about that study. They asked 3 questions, remember? What are you thinking? What are you doing? What are you thinking? And how do you feel? The longer you spend browsing your phone, the more depressed you are. So when I see myself starting to get there, I try to stop it. Yeah.
Right. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know. I wanted you to say something like throw it away or just it's a problem.
a kind of diabolical device because you need it, and yet it builds in the distractions. And
Right.
what really troubles me is schools that give kids tablets that have distraction built in. On the other hand, my 11-year-old grandson is learning to play the piano from YouTube. So, there are pluses and minuses.
Are you teaching
I think
him
we have to be discriminating about it. What?
Are you teaching him to meditate?
He hasn't asked. I only teach people to meditate if they ask. I don't force it. And I did teach a 5-year-old. You know how? He came to Thanksgiving and he was wearing a Batman costume. And his dad said, "Would you teach him to meditate?" And I said to this kid, "Do you know how Batman got his power?" And he sat down and watched his breath for a half hour without moving. I was amazed.
Wow.
5-year-old kid. So I think, there's receptivity, but you have to do it in the right way.
I can't wait for his book. Okay, we're going to open it up to questions. Probably 30 years
If you have a
from now.
question, please raise your hand and I'll bring the microphone to you.
I knew there'd be
The tradition at Live Talks LA is questions start with a W or an H, sometimes a D. They're generally short. There is no such thing as a 2-part question, and only Lisa gets to ask follow-up questions.
Thanks. Thank you both very much. I wondered if you might talk about how you came to write the book. I know you've been friends since college,
Sure.
and how you did that since he's in Wisconsin. Did you trade? Did you decide
okay.
on different things?
So the book Altered Traits is kind of the fruition. Remember, we were both really dissed at Harvard for doing this. It's kind of a revenge book in a way. So now there are like 6,000 studies, 60 are really good. And we wrote about that. And we were kind of gleeful about it, like, haha. But we've been very good friends all that time. And he's the scientist. He did the science. I'm the writer. I did the writing. So it was a very happy and easy collaboration. They're not all like that, are
No,
they? No.
many are not.
Yeah.
But did it enhance your friendship, would you say?
Oh, yeah, we're much even closer because we got to do something together, which really helps. Yeah.
Right. Thank you.
Hello. It's a wonderful book. And in the book, you refer to a female researcher at the Max Planck Institute who had a 3-part intervention. And one of them was a dyadic meditation. She did.
Oh, yes.
And so I was wondering, you didn't really go into detail in the book about
Right.
what that might have looked like. And I'm curious about what that intervention might have been.
So the dyadic meditation that you're referring to was done by Tanya Singer at the Max Planck Institute in Leibniz or somewhere in Germany. And I'm not exactly sure. The dyadic meditation was something like for 10 or 20 minutes every day, each of you says what's on your mind, what's troubling you today or whatever, and the other person listens deeply, very fully, and you reverse. So you meditate on the other person, as I recall. However, you could Google Tania, Tania, Singer, and find out if I'm right or not. I'm not sure. Tania has not released all of her data yet, so I don't know what the outcome of it. But we wanted to mention the study because it's the best designed. And in Germany, you can actually get money from the government for stuff like that.
Thank you so much for all your writing and your knowledge and your hosting. Thank you. I work with a lot of children, and the rise in ADD diagnoses. And I'm wondering, have you ever seen any studies where they've used meditation and double-blind setup so that they have the kids with the ADD using it and then some with the AD not using mindfulness, and if in fact there is a difference because it's a mindfulness issue versus a neurological issue?
So ADD is very interesting. ADD, the epidemic of it is in part an artifact of overdiagnosis, you know that. And it is, by definition, an attention disorder. So, why haven't we tried training kids in attention since it's trainable? The reason is that big pharma makes billions of dollars from the meds that are given to kids. And the biggest multi-site study of meds for ADD found that they work well in the first year, so-so in the second year, and not at all in the third. This is kept quiet, of course, by the pharmaceutical companies. So there's now a movement to help kids with ADD and without ADD to train attention. There is even a video game where you count your breaths, you tap on a tablet with every breath, and on the 7th or 9th breath, you tap it twice. And if you get it right, flowers bloom in a desert or something. It's a game that kids like. It's called Tenacity. And it's just coming out on the market. But Belly Buddies is free. Anybody can do that in any school, or a parent can do it with a kid. And I'd like to see that done more. And there are studies in the pipeline that are testing mindfulness and attention training for ADD, but it's early days, so we can't say. Yeah, it's a great idea, though.
Hi. You mentioned that when you were around the yogis, that you had a profound feeling of nourishment and comfort and so on. And I'm curious if there have ever been any studies of either their electromagnetic field or some kind of magnetic resonance, or besides the thinking.
You mean why is it contagious?
Yeah, is there some energetic level of contagion?
Well, we do know there's an area called social neuroscience that's a new aspect of brain research where they study two brains and two people who are interacting. And they've discovered that there are circuits in the brain that are designed to lock into the brain of the person you're with and create a back channel, which is instantaneous, automatic, and unconscious. Emotions are transmitted that way. I suspect that back channel is involved in this. But, it's very hard to get a yogi to come and be studied. And so the answer to your question, have there been studies, is no. And I don't know if there will be. First of all, Richie did manage to get 21, one by one. But it's very hard they're not in a world where scientific research is anything that makes sense to them or that they know. The 21 who came because Matthew said it was a good idea and it would help people. It would help other people. Their motivation was actually what you call bodhicitta, or compassion. And I'd love to see the study done that you mentioned, maybe one day. The Dalai Lama, by the way, is a big advocate of just that kind of research. He'd like to see every aspect of meditation or, what these changes, like in altered traits. Oh, I should mention, by the way, that this is, if you like to hear books instead of read them, I read this book on an audio. So, because I know there are some people sit in cars for a long time here. Yeah.
Yes.
That was just a humanitarian gesture on my part. So
All your
anyway,
books are
it's a
big
great
here
idea,
tonight.
but not yet.
Hi,
Yes.
how you doing? How does one select what kind of meditation to partake in, and then
Oh.
how does one assess their progress, whether it's trying to increase their concentration levels, regulate their mood better? How do you assess your progress?
So I heard that there was just one question per person. And I counted two, and I couldn't quite hear the second, so I'll answer the first, which is how do you decide what meditation to do? There is only one kind of meditation which is the most valuable, and that is whatever meditation you will do. So I would say it does not matter what you pick, and you can try different ones, but once you find one you like, stick with that.
I'll ask the follow-up question.
Sure.
Because I've sat with people, and invariably someone asks, how do I know I'm doing this right? Or how do I know that I'm getting better?
Sure. So think of meditation as an expertise that can be improved. And there's a lot of research on expertise. There's what's called smart practice. Smart practice is when you have a coach. Think of golf, or think of professional singers or actors. Many of them, all their career, will have a coach, someone who will listen to their voice or watch their acting or watch their golf swing and say, you might try this. It might help you get a little better. So it's the same with meditation. Find someone who you can ask questions of. If you're not sure you're doing it right, you want someone who will help you get it right, and then maybe help you progress. And by the way, we found that on retreats, people make more progress in the ways I mentioned than doing it, daily at home. That's very important, but it's even better if you can be with a teacher who will give you feedback and help you get it exactly right, or help you with the next thing you might do.
You had mentioned meditation's impact on slowing aging. Have there been any studies that you've seen about Alzheimer's?
Not yet. It does make sense. There is some suggestive data that we review at the end, but it's only in mice. So frustrating. It turns out that that gamma in mice cleans up the tangles in the brain that make Alzheimer. But we have no idea if gamma in people will do the same thing. It's a long leap, and many things that show up in mice don't work in humans. Yeah.
You talked a little bit about the discursive and the non-discursive, and I've done both, where it's, go with the breath, or metta, where it's, compassion, and you're actually thinking about people and words and so on. And I've often wondered, how are they both meditation, and what are the differences, if any, in terms of the effects?
Right. So they do have different effects, as I mentioned. The loving kindness practice, which is a discursive practice in that you're thinking about these people and wishing them well, has brain effects in a particular circuitry for caring and for helping people who need help. The general effects of mindfulness are not in those circuits. They're in different circuits, prefrontal circuits, for attention particularly, and also in helping calm the amygdala, which is related. It's a dance between prefrontal and amygdala and that whole circuitry. So I think the answer is that both are good, but both are different. Yeah.
I'm of the belief that meditation impacts healing from disease, and as a practitioner, since with this focus in mind since '98,
Yes.
My doctors have said they can't explain it. So I'm interested in networking or meeting if there's researchers or studies, because this is something I would like very much to personally work with other people in. I feel it's remarkable.
Yeah.
And I want to know what you know about it.
Sure. So, I can talk from the research point of view. As I mentioned, John Kabat-Zinn, when he did his hospital-based program, never claimed he could cure a disease. On the other hand, there are many anecdotal reports of people who did one meditation or another and had a remission or some great improvement. There's no study yet that shows, there are many studies that show that people with chronic disease have better quality of life, but that the disease symptoms remain. And there are anecdotal reports that maybe it improves some, helps heal or improve, but there's no research on that yet. It's like there are therapies now that include mindfulness or some kind of meditation, and they've been found to help as much as medication with depression, with anxiety, and maybe to be good for PTSD, we don't know yet. But again, there's so much more to learn, and the studies haven't been done. So both with medical problems and with psychotherapeutic issues, the early returns are positive, but not conclusive. Yeah.
I wonder if you'd be willing to share your personal experiences or encounters with meditation as far as the most profound or intense experiences.
Could you speak a
you've
little
had.
more loudly? I'm sorry.
I'm wondering if you'd be willing to share on a personal level
Yes.
your inner experience, the most profound or intense experiences or encounters you've had with meditation in your 40 years of meditating.
Oh, so what's been my experience as a
Most
meditator?
profound. Most profound.
Most profound.
Oh, most profound. No, I won't share that. But thank you for asking. One of the reasons we wrote a book called Altered Traits was that it's easy to get fascinated with experiences that happen during meditation and on retreat. And I've been there. I would say I started meditation because it helped with anxiety when I was very young. I got more deeply into it and did intensive retreats because I was fascinated by the altered states I got into. Bliss, equanimity, you name it. And then I realized that, well, the problem with altered states, and this is true of psychedelics and so on, is that you may have a wonderful experience while you're meditating or while the drug is in your body, but when you come down, you're the same schmuck you were before you began. And that's why we got interested in lasting change and altered traits. So I now feel it's more interesting, to me at any rate, to explore what are the qualities that develop as you do more and more of the practice, and how do they affect your everyday life. So that's why it's a fascinating question, but not one that I would go into.
When did neuroplasticity become?
Glad you asked. Neuroplasticity. Do you know neuroplasticity? It's pretty well known now. It's the idea, the concept in brain science that the more you exercise a brain circuit, the stronger the connectivity becomes. The less you use it, the weaker it becomes. And this is well established now in science. When we started down this path of altered traits, we had no idea how it could occur. And neuroplasticity came of age in the early 90s, well after we had started this. And it gave us a theoretical and scientific scaffolding for altered traits, for lasting changes because the brain has changed.
Yeah. We have time for 2 more questions.
So, harking back to some of your earlier work, and particularly in social emotional learning.
Yes.
It's a practice now that mindfulness is either a door opener for social emotional learning in schools. It's becoming more popular, and yet it's a simple mindfulness practices. So, in this more complex work that you've been doing, you're dealing with in the book, what do you see as the relationship of the more complex work to existing practices and programs that we're struggling to get into the schools?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So one of the Actually, when I wrote Emotional Intelligence, I was really making an argument for teaching these skills, self-awareness, self-management, empathy, relationship skills to kids. And I just, a few years ago, wrote a book you might want to see. It's called The Triple Focus in Education. You can get it online, Triple Focus. And we propose that social emotional learning, as it's called, has actually had a huge take-up in schools. It's idiosyncratic because these decisions are made at local level. But still, it's in hundreds, maybe tens of thousands of schools. What we're proposing in that book is that the next step is mindfulness or attention training, loving kindness or encouraging compassion, and the third thing is systems learning. For example, you may notice that we have glasses instead of plastic bottles with water. Well, plastic bottles with water, do you know what's wrong with them? They contain what are called phthalates or PBA, is that right? BPA, which are used as hardeners or softeners. Every plastic, even corn-based plastic, has them. They're endocrine disruptors. The endocrine system controls all the hormonal activity in the body. An endocrine disruptor is not a good thing. This is part of what you would understand if you analyzed systems. There's a new systems practice called industrial ecology, which is an amalgam of chemistry, biology, earth sciences, environmental science, industrial engineering, and so on. And it helps you deconstruct something like a plastic bottle and understand at every point in its life cycle what it is doing to the environment, to you, to other species. And I feel that if the planet is going to survive, kids should learn this too. So that's the triple focus. So I see what the Belly Buddies is part of the program, and compassion, learning compassion is part of the program, but so is systems. There's a school, an international set of schools called the IB, International Baccalaureate, very high-level college prep school. And they're starting a curriculum in compassionate systems and I think this is fabulous. And I think more schools should do it. So thank you for asking.
Is there meditation going on at Harvard now?
Is meditation going on at Harvard?
Were they studying it in any way?
Yes, even at Harvard.
Even
they're
at
studying
Harvard.
it, yes.
Hope they've had you speak there.
And our last question for the evening.
Thank you. One of the other ways that we sustainably change our relationship to the world is through language. I'm curious, given meditation as something that you've mentioned, at times we look behind language. How have you found that relationship change through meditative practice, and in what way has that informed your research?
Yeah, so I think the relationship between meditation and language is not necessarily direct. So I think it's more effective from a languaging point of view to study something like nonviolent communication, which is a way of expressing your feelings candidly without the other person feeling attacked. I think that's very important and a hugely important and helpful skill at work and at home, everywhere. I don't think you necessarily would get there through meditation. You might get other places. For example, if your amygdala becomes triggered less or less strongly or you recover more quickly, you'd be less likely to use language which is attacking. So the two do go hand in hand. I think they're complementary, but I don't think one necessarily leads to the other. Is that it?
I think that's it.
Well,
Time to sign books.
Okay, thank you very much.